In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. Despite the advanced technologies of multi-layered, computer-generated images, NASA is still unable to remove bubbles in space. Bubbles in space.
So many times during spacewalks outside the International Space Station, we can see air bubbles rising up. Can you touch on how there are air bubbles in space?
Can you be more specific? Air bubbles?
So yeah, like a lot of times during the footage, the NASA footage, you can see bubbles coming up out of the helmets or kind of from underneath you. How do you explain bubbles in space?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about. Now sometimes you get water in the helmet, and it's either from sweat or from the cooling garments. And in some of my spacewalks, I had like water in the helmet, not like I was going to drown in the helmet, but just little bits of water probably came from sweat. Often on the outside of the space station, you'll liberate little pieces of, it's a really harsh environment out there, and the outside of the space station gets beat up pretty good. And sometimes, you'll see just little flecks of paint or something that you might have disrupted floating away from the suit. And, that's generally what that is. I've never seen any kind of air bubble anywhere.
Yeah. Could it be that you're filming in an underwater pool and you're not really out there? All right, well, I just encourage everyone to look up Bubbles in Space, #Bubbles in Space. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You spent $45 to say that.
And I got him free.
Don't spread the copy. And flat in space, very flat.
I want to draw the public's attention to what may be an extremely egregious example of malfeasance, and just to help illustrate the gravity of the situation, imagine if the federal government gave $19.5 billion to Hollywood. Well, there is a growing body of evidence that the International Space Station is not in outer space, but it's being filmed in a desalinated pool down here on Earth, and it's being falsely misrepresented. Started with this phenomenon known as bubbles in space. Bubbles out in space. Many of these so-called spacewalks, which have been falsely misrepresented as live, it is known that the astronauts do train in these big underwater tanks. And so this body of evidence, there are harnesses, there are green screens, and if this is true, it's a big deal. These bubbles in space might represent the smoking gun in probably the biggest hoax since